Welcome to a series that we call The End of Times, where we're going through the book of Revelation verse by verse to try our best to see what it is we could expect to happen and what it is we should be doing in the end times, or the times Jesus refers to as the end of the age. And as we've gone through this book of Revelation, where we are is a place in Revelation that most people are afraid of, to be quite honest. When people are afraid to learn the book of Revelation, they're typically talking about these chapters that we're in right now, because it's Judgment Day. The wrath of God is being unleashed on the earth, and His judgment is being unleashed on the earth. But these next few episodes, we're going to look very closely at exactly what that looks like when Christ returns. Where does He return to, and what does that judgment day look like? Because it's brutal. It is not a pretty thing for those who aren't of God. This is a day of mourning, and it's a day of bloodshed. Great, tremendous bloodshed. And we're going to take these next two episodes and just kind of look at what that judgment day literally looks like on earth. Now, I want to remind everybody that as we go through the book of Revelation, there's a few things you need to be very clear on. Number one, you can't read it like a book. You can't sit there and follow it like a story that goes from one thing to the next, because oftentimes we're going to see the same thing multiple times. Because who is writing Revelation? John has been taken up into the throne room of God, where we can see what's taking place on the earth from the throne room of God. So as we look at this judgment day that we're about to see here, keep in mind that it is being viewed from the throne room of God. Now later we're going to see this exact same judgment day in Revelation on the earth. So it's not happening and then it happens again. It's just you're seeing it from two different views. Secondly, it's very important you don't just jump in and grab a verse of Revelation. God laid it out perfect. It's important you study it verse by verse. So if you haven't gone through and watched the other episodes, definitely go back and start with episode 1 and continue on. Or do a study on your own. Now, I'm not saying you won't get anything out of this, because you definitely will. But to truly understand it, you got to go verse by verse. So we're just going to pick it up where we left off, and what is taking place is Christ's return. This is the second time we're being exposed to this. The first time is just a mention of it from the angels. Now we're seeing what reaping the harvest of the earth with a sickle actually looks like. So we're just going to pick it up where we left off. Christ had returned, and it was told to Him to thrust in His sickle to the earth and reap. And this is what John is seeing from heaven, or the throne room of God. And we're just going to pick it up where we left off in Revelation 14, verse 17. Then another angel came out of the temple which is in heaven, he also having a sharp sickle. And another angel came out from the altar, who had power over fire, and he cried with a loud cry to him who had the sharp sickle, saying, "Thrust in your sharp sickle and gather the clusters of the vine of the earth, for her grapes are fully ripe." So the angel thrust his sickle into the earth and gathered the vine of the earth and threw it into the great winepress of the wrath of God. And the winepress was trampled outside the city, and blood came out of the winepress up to the horses' bridles for 1,600 furlongs. That is a lot of blood. That's a lot of blood. Where is this taking place, and what in the world is happening here? So we don't like to jump ahead here on Revelation, but every now and then we do, because I want you to see what's actually taking place outside of Jerusalem here. So we're going to jump ahead just briefly, and then we're going to go right back. So we're going to jump ahead to where we see this take place again, which is Revelation 19, where we get a better description of Christ's return from the earth. And we're going to pick it up right after His return, just like we just did, because what we just saw was Christ's return, and then these angels did their thing. Now we see Christ's return, and we're just going to pick it up right there in Revelation 19:17. Then I saw an angel standing in the sun, and he cried with a loud voice, saying to all the birds that fly in the midst of heaven, "Come and gather together for the supper of the great God, that you may eat the flesh of kings, the flesh of captains, the flesh of mighty men, the flesh of horses, and of those who sit on them, and the flesh of all people, free and slave, both small and great. And I saw the beasts, the kings of the earth, and their armies gathered together to make war against him who sat on the horse and against his army. So ultimately what's taking place is Christ has returned, and then the beast is now going to go wage war with him, and that doesn't end well, as we see, for the beast. Now, we've also, other prophets have talked about this as well in the Old Testament. We can see this in a lot greater detail. So we're going to take 2 episodes and focus on what's going on with this winepress of the wrath of God outside of Jerusalem. We're going to spend 2 episodes. The first one today, where is this at? Where is this taking place at? And then next episode, we're going to talk about what does this actually look like, because Joel and Zechariah give great descriptions of exactly what is taking place here. So let's talk about first, where is this happening? Well, it's outside Jerusalem, but there's some specifics given here on where this location of this war is about to take place. So if we go to the book of Joel, in Joel 3, starting verse 1, "For behold, in those days and at that time, when I bring back the captives of Judah and Jerusalem, I will also gather all nations and bring them down to the Valley of Jehoshaphat, and I will enter into judgment with them there on account of my people, my heritage Israel." So Joel is saying that Jesus is his judgment is going to take place in the Valley of Jehoshaphat. And a lot happens in this Valley of Jehoshaphat. Now, where is the Valley of Jehoshaphat? And we'll jump to 12. "Let the nations be weakened and come up to the Valley of Jehoshaphat, for there I will sit to judge all the surrounding nations. Put in the sickle, for the harvest is ripe. Come, go down, for the winepress is full. The vats overflow, for their wickedness is great. Multitudes, multitudes in the valley of decision. For the day of the Lord is near in the valley of decision. The sun and the moon will grow dark, and the stars will diminish their brightness. The Lord also will roar from Zion and utter his voice from Jerusalem. The heavens and the earth will shake, but the Lord will be a shelter for his people and a strength of the children of Israel." Now, this Valley of Jehoshaphat historically has been brought up twice in the Bible. Now, King Jehoshaphat we can read about in 2 Chronicles. Ultimately, what took place was in 2 Chronicles 20 was a multitude came up against Jehoshaphat. Now, keep in mind, Jehoshaphat was the king of Judah, and he had armies leaning into the hundreds of thousands of soldiers. So whatever this multitude was much greater than anything that he even dreamed of being able to stand up against. And he called out to the God of Israel to be with him, and God then talked to the prophet and said, "Go meet them in this valley, and you do not need to fight in this war, for this is God's war, not your war." And the enemy got confused, and they started killing each other, and the enemy killed themselves ultimately. They didn't even have to draw one single sword. Potentially millions of soldiers all killed themselves. And it was really one of the greatest victories in all of the Bible, and that is the Valley of Jehoshaphat. Now, even prior to Jehoshaphat, King David also went and fled into that valley, which is at the time referred to as the Valley of Kidron, when his son was trying to kill him. But now we refer to it as the Valley of Jehoshaphat, or as Joel referred to it as the Valley of Decision. It is the Valley of Judgment that is taking place here. And Zechariah gives great detail into what is going to happen and exactly where Christ will return. In Zechariah 14, verse 1, "Behold, the day of the Lord is coming, and your spoil will be divided in your midst. For I will gather all the nations to battle against Jerusalem." So there's that battle again. "The city will be shaken, the houses rifled, the women ravished. Half the city shall go into captivity, but the remnant of the people shall not be cut off from the city. Then the Lord will go forth and fight against those nations, as he fights in the day of battle. And in that day his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives, which faces Jerusalem in the east, and the Mount of Olives shall be split in two from east to west, making a very large valley. Half of the mountain shall move towards the north, and half of it towards the south. Then you shall flee through my mountain valley, for the mountain valley shall reach to Azal. Yes, you shall flee as you fled from the earthquake in the days of Uzziah, king of Judah, Thus the Lord my God will come, and all the saints with you. Now, what this is saying is that Jesus will return to the Mount of Olives. Now, we also know that to be true because he told the disciples that in the book of Acts. If we look at the book of Acts, in chapter 1, verse 9, it says, Now when he had spoken these things, while they watched, he was taken up, and a cloud received him out of their sight. And while they looked steadfastly towards heaven as he went up, behold, 2 men stood by them in white apparel, who also said, Men of Galilee, why do you stand gazing up into heaven? This same Jesus who was taken up from you into heaven will so come in the like manner as you saw him go into heaven. So he will return in a cloud of glory just like he left on the Mount of Olives. The Valley of Jehoshaphat just happens to be right between Jerusalem and the Mount of Olives. So ultimately what's taking place, when we put all these prophecies together, is he returns to the Mount of Olives. The Antichrist, who is in Jerusalem, the massive world war type nations will then try to attack him there, and they will cross through Jerusalem. He rips the mountain in half, and all his people will then flee between him. And as they enter into that valley, he essentially destroys them to the point that there is so much blood. And the winepress was trampled outside the city, and blood came out of the winepress up to the horses' bridles for 1,600 furlongs. I mean, this is a brutal moment in time, and it is only Jesus. It is only Jesus. It is the world power of the Antichrist. This one world order, all of the nations, all of their weapons, all of their armies, all coming against Jesus. And this is the result. It is not a pretty, it's the valley of decision is what's taking place here. This is not a pretty scenario, and it's you know, when we saw it from heaven, the winepress is a spiritual image. But what we see in this valley, this is very real. This is very real. It literally will be filled with blood up to the horses' bridles for 1,600 furlongs. The next episode, we're going to talk about what this literally looks like. This is a brutal moment in time. This episode was dedicated to where did this take place? Well, it took place in the valley. It takes place in the Valley of Jehoshaphat, between the Mount of Olives and Jerusalem, exactly the place that Jesus said he would return to. And at that moment, the Antichrist is going to go up against him, and it is not going to end well for him. And we're going to get much better detail next episode on what that actually looks like. So love to hear your thoughts on all this, and comments. Definitely put them in the comments below. If you like this video, click like and subscribe. If you feel called to support this channel through Patreon, that link is also below. But the most important part of this channel is we take prayer requests, so never hesitate to send that in. Thank you for watching this episode of God, Family, and Guns. And as always, love God, love your family, and love guns.